Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. The best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL wire site that covers, of course, your Arizona Cardinals. And for our second show of the week and our second preview show of the week is Seth Cox. My co-host is with me from EventToTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site. And this is our Week 12 Cardinals-Seahawks preview, picks, predictions, and props. Seth, Cardinals are in such a great position this week. I mean, they've won 4 in a row. They're coming off a bye, and they're playing a Seahawks team. They're getting a little bit healthier, but this is a really good position for the Cardinals because they could a win for me. Like at first and foremost, it ensures that no one will have a head-to-head tiebreak over them in the division. And if we're talking about the 49ers, there's no way the 49ers can outdo their division record because San Francisco's already got 3 losses. The Cardinals would have 3 division wins. And so, like, you're setting yourself up really, really nice. But the Seattle team's weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been incredibly weird, and it's been hard to, like, nail down, right? And that's why this is going to be such an interesting matchup, because you kind of talked about the other night when we were talking about the second half of the season. I mean, this is a team that has lost 5 of its last 7, and you look at those games, right? They start out 3-0, and none of those wins were.
We know at the time Denver wasn't anybody. It was Bo Nix's NFL debut. The Patriots were gross. The two
they
of
had
us
to beat
Dolphins.
And they had to beat the Patriots in overtime, Jess. Like,
that's right.
So, they won in overtime over a bad Patriots team. They beat the Tualess Dolphins. Then they go to Detroit and they get shellacked. Then they go to New York.
Lost the freaking Giants
and get beat. Then they host. Oh, sorry, that New York loss was at home, so that makes it even worse, right? Like, that's an even worse loss. Then they host San Francisco and get beat up. And then they go to Atlanta. They're
beat the crap out of the Falcons, which make no sense at all.
And you're sitting there going, oh, they're this is a desperate game, desperate team, blah, blah, blah. And they just wax. I mean, absolutely bludgeon the Falcons. And you're like, okay, this is a good team. That's kind of what we expected all along, but this is a good team. They just had a little lull in that middle. And then they just get trounced at home by Buffalo again. Like, at home. Jess, this is the crazy thing. They were 4-5 going into their bye. They lost to the Rams at home as well. They're 4-5 going into their bye. They played 3 road games and they had a losing record, Jess.
Oh, man.
Like that's unheard of and they were 2-1 on the road, by the way, Jess. So they went 2-4 at home, which used to be unheard of in
the
Seattle,
Cardinals were
right?
the Cardinals were the only team that knew how to beat the Seahawks in Seattle.
And then they come out of their bye. They go to San Francisco, one of their 5 road games in the second half of the season, and they beat the Niners. And now the Niners kind of aren't very good. We can agree with that right now. And it's not that they're not good. It's just that they haven't played well. But it just makes you go, what the hell is this team? Like, a team that is 16th, so dead average in scoring offense, but 21st in scoring defense. But yes, they have games where they've held their opponent to 17, 14, and 3 points, and 2 games where they've held their opponent to 20 points. So their 5 wins, every opponent has scored 20 points or less. their 5 losses, every opponent scored 26 points or more. Ooh. And by the way, 26 is the low. 29, 31, 36, 42. So like Jekyll and Hyde is exactly what this team is. Like there's no consistency. There's no halfway with this team, right? I guess last week was probably the closest to halfway for them overall with a 20 to 17 win over the Niners, right? But this is just a weird team this year. And you get even deeper into these numbers, Jess. They're 28th in rushing offense, 28th. And then on top of that, they're 27th against the run. So they don't run the ball well and they can't stop the run. But on the flip side, they're second in passing and they're middle of the pack in stopping the pass, 15th. So it sets up to be a game that on paper you're like, oh, this is in favor of the Arizona Cardinals, right? Like a team that doesn't run the ball well, has to throw the ball.
And mind you, here's that stat that we always like to look at, and that's yards allowed per carry. They give up 4.8 yards a rush.
Right. Yeah, that's a lot. And then on top of that, Jess, though, they've given up 15 touchdown passes and only thrown 11. So like they're doing a great job of throwing the ball around the field. They don't score the ball particularly well. They do a great job rushing for touchdowns, 6th in rushing touchdowns, but 22nd in passing. Like that's the thing is like none of this team makes sense. They're number 2 in passing yards, the 4th worst team in rushing yards, but then they're outside of the top 20 in passing touchdowns. And they're top 6 in rushing. Like none of it makes sense at all. Like it's basically like if they
Smith is the league's leading passer, at 278 yards per game. But he also leads the league in interceptions. He's been sacked 32 times this year. They turn the ball over a lot. They have turned the ball over in 8 of their 10 games and have multiple turnovers in 6 of them. But recently they've been taking the ball away because they had 3 takeaways against the Falcons, and they've got a takeaway in each of their last 3 games as well. So they move the ball really well, but their pass protection has been bad, and they give up the ball. That said, their receiving core is still one of the better ones, and the Cardinals, I will say this, the Cardinals are well tested when it comes to receiving core because the last 3 games have gone Miami, Chicago, and New York, who have very talented groups of receivers because you got Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. In Miami, you have Keenan Allen, Roma Dunze, DJ Moore in Chicago. Then you got Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson for the Jets. And the Cardinals have handled those guys quite well overall.
Yeah, and it's just some interesting things to look at as this game unfolds. You mentioned throwing the ball all over the field. Jackson Smith and Jigba, a guy we both like coming out of Ohio State last year, is turning into another very, very good Ohio State receiver. I mean, he's on pace for over 1,000 yards this year. You look at the numbers; they're good, right? He's already surpassed his career high in yards. And he's got 7 games left to go. He's likely going to break that 1,000-yard mark in his second year. DK Metcalf, a guy that was basically a freak, right, of nature. He's been banged up. He's missed a couple games.
His yardage production is still up there. He's in 8 games. He only has 40 fewer yards than in Jigba, even though he's only got 42 receptions. So he's that yard averaging guy that he was at the beginning. Those, catch those deep passes. He's averaging over 15 yards a catch so far.
Yeah, and what's crazy, Jess, is he's averaging the 2nd most yards per game in his career at 79.8. The last time he was that high was 2020. He was averaged 81.4 yards per game, was a second team all pro, had over 1,300 yards receiving, right? And so now he's basically on pace for that again. The biggest difference being he's not scoring touchdowns. I mean, he has 3 on the season, but it's like we talked about, this team gets into the red zone and it all of a sudden becomes the Baltimore Ravens or hell, the Arizona Cardinals, and they can run the ball. But between the 20s, they can't run the ball for anything. I mean, their leading rusher, Kenneth Walker III, who's a dynamic playmaker. Now, he's only played in 8 games, been banged up as well. He's got 452 yards on the season, but he's averaging 4 yards per carry, Jess. I mean, this is a guy that has one 100-yard game all season, and it was the first game of the season. Like, after that, it's been, I mean, he was banged up. He missed the next couple games, came back against the Lions, great team, so you're not expecting much, had 12 for 80. So those first 2 games, you know, this is a guy that had 32 carries for 183 yards, over 5.5 yards per carry. Just since then, it's been bad. He's got 1 game over 4 yards per carry, and he's got 2 games with under 3 yards per carry. But he finds the end zone somehow, some way still. You know, and then Zach Charbonnet, the guy that was supposed to be kind of the thunder to the thunder, you know, he's been really, I don't want to say bad, but he hasn't been good this year. He's down a full yard per carry.
Well, they're basically using him as a short yardage back.
Right. And he's down to 3.3 yards per carry. Just, I mean, it's been a weird season for them. He does have 4 touchdowns rushing. So like you said, you know, he gets inside the 5, and he's a guy that you have to watch out for. But this is a group that they really just haven't made any sense all year. And now you come into a game where the Cardinals are coming off a bye. You know, we don't really have, I mean, we've got 1 year to go off of, right? Like, so we really have no information on how Jonathan Gannon and company prepare coming off of a bye week. Last year they lost, but they were playing the San Francisco 49ers, and they had, I think that was the game they scored the most points, or the second most points they did all season.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like,
That's when they broke the 49ers rush defense last year in that game.
Right. And so, you know, it's not necessarily that they're bad or good. It's just that we just have no information on what they do coming out of a bye. I mean, last year was a different animal. So this year, you know, we'll start to get, because we'll have 2 games, right? So we'll start to get a sense of what they do coming out of bye weeks. But, you know, this is a really interesting game because it is a matchup of teams that do things the opposite way, right? The Cardinals are 5th in rushing, 21st in pass defense. By the way, that's like up from 28th. It's just 4 weeks ago. So
yeah,
trending in the right direction, but 5th in rushing and 21st in pass defense. So you look at it and you go, okay, I mean, that's not terrible, but you know, and then they are 18th in passing touchdowns, so better than the Seahawks, who throw the ball a lot more and have a lot more passing yards. But all of that to say, this is one of those situations that you look at and you go, I feel like the Cardinals are a better team.
At this point, yes.
But it's still, we're still Cardinals fans. They're still the Cardinals. And so we're kind of like, okay, you know, like, it's not that we don't buy it, but like,
we know something's going to happen. We still know that there's deficiencies. There's deficiencies on this team that they're just overcoming right now.
And what are their biggest deficiencies? It is the Seahawks' biggest strength, right? Throwing that football. And so that'll be what's interesting. But I mean, you talked about it, 32 sacks given up this year already. You know, you flip that and you look at Kyler, he's been sacked 15 times. You know, but again, on the flip side, you look at the Seahawks and they have a decent pass rush. they've got 23 sacks on the season, led by Derek Hall. No, not the Diamondbacks guy, but the Cardinals, who don't have a dominant pass rusher.
They've got 21 sacks, but 11 of those came against the Bears and the Rams with their backup tackles. Now, the offensive line play, I think they're going to start seeing improvement in Seattle because Abe Lucas is finally healthy. The right side of that line was really bad in the first half of the season.
And I don't disagree with that, Jess, but I mean, is he going to be ready to go out the gate game one type stuff? Like that's kind of my question on that. and if he'll be ready to go. And then you look at the rest of the injury report. Leonard Williams, one of their big defensive linemen, is hurting. Laken Tomlinson, one of their starting guards, is out. I don't know if he won't play, but a big guy. He's banged up. They've been banged up, as you said, along that line. And so you just look at what this team is, and if they're going to be how healthy they will be coming into this game. But because the Cardinals are unusually healthy, right? Like,
don't say that.
I know. Kelvin Beachum didn't practice yesterday, but that was a rest day.
Yeah, he gets a rest day. But and it's very possible that that Jonah Williams will start. So we don't know what the plan for that is even yet.
And then you look at it, the one guy that's worrisome, obviously, but even now we're kind of like, oh, is it a big deal? Jalen Thompson is out, but this will be a week that we love Rabbit, but it's like, is he ready for this type of passing offense, right? Like, is he ready for this type of barrage that he'll see? Those are just interesting things to look at, because again, from everything, it's kind of a strength versus weakness on both sides of the ball. So it's like, who gets more from their guy, and who's able to make plays and create opportunities, and who's able to overcome those, quote unquote weaknesses more and not give up points.
Coming up next on the Rise of Seahawks podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web. Listen, we want to talk about the matchup. The matchups in this game, the keys to the game. That's coming up next on Rise of Seahawks. We're back on the Rise of Seahawks podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals take on the Seattle Seahawks. We talked about the Seahawks and their season so far, which is puzzling. Now to kind of look at the matchups and keys to the game. Seth, you explained it nicely. When the Seahawks win, their opponents score 20 or fewer points. When the Seahawks lose, they score 26 or more. This kind of sounds like, okay, if the Cardinals, like if and this is what I believe about the Cardinals, is right now I think their offense has gotten to a point that teams don't stop them. They stop themselves. That's then when they make their own mistakes. And I don't think there's a defense that can shut down what the Cardinals are doing, limit it to some extent. And so if the Cardinals avoid the mistakes that they can be prone to having, and they play with the same offensive efficiency they played for the last 3 weeks, I think that's kind of the thing. The Seahawks will win ugly games. They won't win those higher scoring games. And so kind of is I guess score over 20 points.
Right. And
points.
And the biggest thing is, and you and I know this, but the biggest thing is you're not going to stop their passing game. Like you said, Geno Smith leads the NFL in passing yards. You don't stop this passing attack, but can you control it and make sure that it's only viable and productive between the 20s? I mean,
and
this year,
and get a pick or two, because Geno's been throwing picks.
Right. And this year he has one game under 200 yards. It's the first game of the season where they beat the Broncos, as you pointed out earlier, right? And in his 3 interceptionless games this year, Jess, 3, they're 2-1. He threw no interceptions in the route of Atlanta. He threw no interceptions in the loss to New York, but then he threw no interceptions in the barely win over the Patriots. But he does have but he also has 2 games where he hasn't thrown a touchdown, and they're 1-1 in those games. So that's why they're so confusing, Jess. It's not because it's like, oh, if you just shut down Geno, they're gonna lose. It's like, well, yeah, you would assume that. And don't get me wrong, that's definitely the best way to win a game. But I mean, they beat the Niners and he threw for 221 yards and an interception, and they won. And then you look at the game, you look at games like against the Rams, right? And yeah, he threw 3 interceptions, but he threw for 363 yards and 3 touchdowns, and they lost. Like, he's just, the whole situation's been super puzzling this year. I mean, even in their win over Miami, which was a rout, just he threw he threw a touchdown and 2 interceptions. Like, you're just like, okay, hold on. I need a second to like make this all make sense. And that's kind of what it is this year. They don't make any sense. The Seahawks don't make any sense, but the gist of it is you're not going to stop their passing game. So how do you limit the damage? And that's going to come down to Garrett Williams, Starling Thomas and Max Melton against 3 very good receivers in Jackson Smith and Jigba, DK Metcalf, and we assume Tyler Lockett, but he is no practice right now. I think he'll be fine, but no practice right now. But then their leading tight end, Noah Fant, who's got 285 yards on 27 receptions, he's hurt. He is actually the one to watch, that he may not be able to play in this game. He's got a groin injury that he's dealing with. So is he able to come back and be productive in this game? A kind of another weapon that they have that they've used in a number of different ways this year, especially in the kick return game, is Laviska Shenault, and he's injured and he's dealing with a foot, I want to say, or something like that, back. He's dealing with the back. And so, all these guys, they're really talented. And again, you're not going to, Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to go for 65, 75 yards. DK Metcalf's going for 80 to 90 yards. Tyler Lockett's getting 50 yards. Like, that's what they do every game. The big thing is you have to hold them out of the end zone, and then you have to find a way to stop. You have to find a way to stop Walker and Charbonnet from getting in the end zone, because even though they've been so unproductive rushing the football, they have been very productive scoring touchdowns, running the football. And then on the flip side, again, who plays? We don't know. I mean, Draymond Jones looks like he's back. He was full today. Jonathan Hankins and Leonard Williams were both on that injury report. Jerron Reed, they gave a Veterans Day off yesterday. And so, their starting line is banged up, and they don't do a good job anyway stopping the run. I mean, you look at it, Tyrell Dotson, a guy you and I talked about this offseason, right? As a potential signing. He's been okay.
And he was cut. They cut him.
Oh, did they cut him?
Yeah, so they outright cut him. So both linebackers they had at the beginning of the year, they're gone. Jerome Baker gone, Tyrell Dodson gone. They traded for Ernest Jones. So Ernest Jones has been playing and has helped quite a bit. Who is the other linebacker that they have in there? I think it's Tyrese Knight. They've got him playing. And
so Knight's playing now.
Yeah, so they got Knight, and they've got Ernest Jones, that is, who used to be. Remember we were talking about that whole Ernest Jones thing is really weird, because really good linebacker, the Rams were happy to get rid of him for nothing. Then the Titans were happy to get rid of him for nothing.
Yeah, and he's a tackling machine, but obviously there's something that none of us are privy to that he's not exactly.
But like their run defense was like they were getting really bad linebacker play for for the run defense, and that's really weird because is that defensive front should be better. It should be better when you got Leonard Williams and you've got Byron Murphy and you've got Draymond Jones and Jaron Reed. They should be better.
Yeah, and Jones has been nicked up this year. Hankins and Reed are old. I mean, they're 32. And we know how quick the fall off is. I mean, for Eric Calais Campbell, there's everybody else, right? Like that's just the reality. And you look at Draymond, he's done a nice job as a pass rusher this year. He's on pace for about 7 sacks, which is, kind of more what he's, used for. Murphy's been interesting because he's been nicked up. He's only played in 7 games this year. He hasn't had a sack since the second game, and he's got a half a sack on the season. So it's not like he's, it's not like he started out gangbusters either. And his rotations have been interesting, I think is the best way to put it. When they do snap percentages, for those that don't know, it's snaps they've played when they're in the game. So it's not like if they miss a game, those get counted against their available snaps. The snap percentages are based solely on availability. So the 3 games he missed, he doesn't get penalized, and so he's only playing 50% of the snaps. And we knew, and it's something that you and I've talked about ad nauseum on the show, is when you draft interior defensive linemen, it takes some time because they go from being either stronger or more athletic or both than the linemen that are blocking them to now every lineman's stronger and faster. So now the technique has to come into play. And so Murph's dealing with that. Hankins, like I said, dude, this is a guy that's been around since 2013 and he's in year 14 and he's playing 40% of the snaps. It's kind of what we talked about with who's the guy a couple years ago, Corey Peters. Remember?
Yeah.
You're like, hey, if you can get Corey for 25% of the snaps, you're in a good spot. And then he was playing 60% of the snaps because everybody else was injured. And you're like, oh crap. You're like, that's how we know this is not the what we're needing from the defensive line. And so, it's kind of the same thing. Jaron Reed, another guy, he's playing 65% of the snaps, Jess. I mean, he's a 32-year-old, 310-pound man. It's not surprising, I guess is the best way to put it, to see him kind of falter. And they've moved him from a outside guy to now he's playing, more on the interior nose level than he was before. So it's it's an interesting year because, like you said, the names make you go, oh, this defense should be really, really good. And the production's just been so bad. And like you said, we're almost, we don't want to get way ahead of ourselves, right? But we're almost to the point now where you're like, oh, I'm not worried about other teams' defense.
That's kind of how I feel about how the Cardinals' offense is going. It's right. Weird, but it's kind of true because even the games where they've been slowed down, it was less about the other team's defense and more about mistakes they were making.
So
except Detroit early in the year. Detroit shut the run game down.
But also Detroit's the best team in the NFL, man. I mean,
yeah.
That isn't it the irony of it that the Cardinals probably have played, 2 of the 3 best teams in the NFL. And that's 2 of their losses.
Yes.
And so that's what it comes down to with this whole situation is that you've got you've got the advantage. You have, I hate saying it this way because it's just, again, we're just not used to it, but like we have on paper, the clear advantage is the Arizona Cardinals running game against the Seattle Seahawks running defense.
Yes.
But on paper, the clear advantage is the Seattle Seahawks passing game against the Cardinals passing defense. So it's going to be one of those things. And I don't want to say like, hey, whoever wins that battle, because that just kind of it makes it a little simpler than it is.
Well, you know what, Mike, those two major stats. One that you talked about, like the opponent scoring. So the Cardinals, if their offense is humming and they're scoring over 20 points, they're probably going to win. Here's the other thing that makes a lot of sense. The Seahawks are turnover prone, and if you look at their wins, they're 1, 2. They won the turnover battle in week 1. They were even in week 2. They lost it in week 3, and then they won it 3. They were +3 against Atlanta and even against San Francisco. In their losses, -2 against the Lions, even the Giants, -3 against the 49ers in their loss, -1 against the Bills. Between the Cardinals getting past 20 points and being plus in the turnover battle, those probably are enough to say that will do it. And which, that's good because the Cardinals take care of the football and the Seattle turns the ball over.
Yeah, so you look at it, like you said, it seems to be, or it should be, or it appears to be that it should be. I hate saying this, like massive advantage Cardinals, because like you said, they're just more careful with the football. It's been one of the things that I know some people get irritated with Kyler about, but I think it's been one of his biggest strengths this year is like, hey, live to fight another day. Like, I don't need to take the chances. And he's even said in the games where he's made that mistake, like, oh, I should have been more aggressive, right? Like I should have taken more chances here. And
even one of the turnovers that he had early in the year was against Detroit, and he got greedy. He said, I wanted to get Marv on the one-on-one, and it got picked off by Branch. It's like the one time he gets greedy and he gets burned. So
right. And so you just look at it. This is a game that lines up where it is, and it's been this way for the last several weeks. And you pointed it out. Strength versus weakness on the opponent's side offensively. But it hasn't mattered. And that's what's been really interesting, right, Jess, is that it has not mattered. And when was the last time we could say that? Like, it's clear that in these instances, the Seahawks should have an advantage as throwing the football. But you said it. Miami had advantage. The Bears should have had an advantage. Like none of these teams were able to take advantage of their advantage, and instead the Cardinals, kind of bullied them. And I think that's where it's so different for us, because we haven't seen, even in the Arians era, they weren't the bullies. Like we haven't seen that type of game from this franchise unless you go back to the 70s, right? And you're old enough to remember those Cardinals teams.
I am not. Luckily, I'm pretty old. I remember when the Cardinals moved here. I don't I knew nothing about the Cardinals before they moved here. So no, but I was not around then.
So that'll be what's interesting, just because this is again one of those situations where on paper it's strength versus weakness on both sides of the ball. And
yes.
and so it's like what team is able to overcome such a played out term, but it's the reality. Like, what team is able to make their weakness less of a weakness in this matchup and take advantage. And that is kind of where this is going to be won and lost, because if the Cardinals can do what a number of teams have done, and like you said, hold them to their 20, 23 points a game, you get a thumbs up, right? And then if on the flip side they can put up 20 plus, more than 20 points, you feel really good coming out of this week going, hey, the Cardinals might be two games clear, or 1.5 technically, of every team in the division.
Nice. Coming up next on the Rise of Seahawks podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the web. Let's move on to the final section where we make our picks, our predictions, and talk prop bets. That's coming up next on Rise of Seahawks. We're back on the Rise of Seahawks podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the web. Time to make our picks. I made my prediction on the show with Cole Musgrove, and I feel a little bit more confident about it. I like the idea of a shootout, and I think if there's a shootout, I think the Cardinals are going to be favored. And they are favored now, by the way. The odds had flipped. The Cardinals, who were 1-point underdogs to start the week, are now 1-point favorites, although the money line has changed again. It was -115 for the Seahawks, -105 for the Cardinals. It shifted to -115 Cardinals, -105 Seahawks. As of right now on BetMGM, it is even money. I mean, it is even on both sides, -110. So it's a pick 'em in for the money line.
And what's interesting on FanDuel, Jess, is it's -1.5 for the Cardinals.
Oh,
but that is at +100.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a sucker bet, right? Like, it's kind of like, all right, show us how much you really believe in this team.
The handle in terms of bets placed, 58% of the bets on BetMGM are for the Cardinals covering, 57% of the money line bets are on the Cardinals winning, and 63% say over 47.5. So yeah, I like this. I think this is going to be. I said it was closer on the show with Cole. I think I'm going to amend that. I think I'm going to say it's going to be Cardinals 34, Seahawks 27. I thought it was going to be like last minute type thing, but I think it'll end up being where Seattle will have the ball last frantically, and the Cardinals will have controlled that. I'm going to say Cardinals 34, Seahawks 27. And the Cardinals pick up their 5th straight win, and a win after the bye, and 3-0 in the division, 7th win, push, and if the rest of the NFC West loses, which the 49ers most certainly could, and the Rams certainly could, they'd be looking at a full 2-game lead over everybody. That would be nice.
Yeah, and that would be the ideal situation, right? So, I mean, I'm looking at this game, and it's tough. 47.5 is a lot of points, and I know the Cardinals defense has not won anybody over. They let's be honest, they're getting close to top 10 in points against, which if we had to guess that, we would have never guessed that.
Right. I will think that evens out, because their last 2 games were against 2 broken teams. So,
right. But they do have, they do have some meat left on this schedule with the Patriots and Panthers that they can gain some more ground on. But, you look at it, I think this is going to be a tough one, Jess. This is in Seattle, coming off a bye, a very desperate Seattle team, as opposed to a Cardinals team that everything we've heard I've loved, right? Like, we're not even looking at the playoffs. We're looking to be 1-0, blah, 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 all the good stuff. That being said, I just feel like there's a difference in senses of urgency, if you will, between the two teams, and kind of, the Seahawks know, with an older quarterback, like I just went over, all those older defensive linemen, that window is, it's not shut, Jess, but it's pretty close. And I think there's going to be a slight desperation difference. I'm going to take the Seahawks 23, the Cardinals 20.
Okay, so you're going with that same money stat. If their opponent doesn't go past 20, so the Cardinals stick at 20, that would mean that the Seahawks would win. Now, some props. We've got some props up there. My favorite one, because of the type of game I'm anticipating, I think my favorite prop is a quarterback prop, and it has passing touchdowns, over 1.5 touchdown passes for Kyler Murray at plus 125. Now, if you believe it'll be more like Seth's game, you might not want to do that. But if the Cardinals score 34 points, that gives you the opportunity for, 4 touchdowns, which you could get 2 rushing touchdowns and 2 passing touchdowns. I love the over 1.5 touchdown passes for Kyler at plus 125.
Yeah, and if you do like that, it's better odds right now on FanDuel at plus 136. So get over there, get those. On the flip side, you have the Geno Smith number. His interception right now, Jess, for yes is minus 108. So to throw an interception, minus 108, I would go smash that right now if you have that opportunity. Like you said, he's been very careless with the ball. Hasn't been something that he's done a good job
honestly, it's partially been, he's getting hit as he's thrown. There's been tipped passes. So, but either way, turnovers are turnovers, and he's thrown 11 of them. He's thrown 11 of them in 10 games. So that's a good chance.
Yeah. So, I mean, minus 108, you're losing a little juice, but it's not bad numbers. The receiving props, Jackson Smith and Jigba is 55.5. I would take that over. And then the other one that I love, Trey McBride over 52.5. I know that seems like a lot, but McBride is playing obviously extremely well. And then on top of that, they don't do a great job against tight ends.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. Let me see if we've got the alternate receiving yards. You can get Trey McBride at 75 plus at plus 180. And if you like Jackson Smith and Jigma at 75 plus, you get him plus 165. If you look at the rushing props on BetMGM, you've got, let me find that. I had it just a moment ago. Then when I open one up, there's the rushing prop. So Connor's at 68.5. Ken Walker at 63.5. Kyler all down to 28.5. I wouldn't mind going for that one. But yeah, I like James Conner on the over 68.5. If you ladder that all the way up to rushing receiving yards. Yeah, that's all right. Well, James Conner, because they've been using him a little more in the pass game. 100 plus, combined rushing receiving yards is plus 100. And then if you think he's going to get a big game, 125 plus goes all the way to plus 260. So that might be a fun one to use there.
The other one that I like, Jess, in this one, and that's something that I think that they're going to try to continue to do, and that's get Marvin Harrison in work early, and that's he's over 5.5 yards receiving in the first quarter. I mean, that's one catch, right? So
yes,
I like that. I would, if I was to do something, that I would definitely go after that one. That's one that I do like there too.
The kicking props. They have good kicking props. Both Chad Ryland and Jason Myers over 1.5 field goals made at plus 110.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And so the other one that I like, just based on what I'm seeing, this total points, it's 47.5. I'm saying 43. So if you want to get right around there, the under 44.5 plus money, if that's a little too close to you, I'll Under 46.5 is also plus money at plus 104. So like 47.5 is the line. You can go 1 point under there and get a good value there.
And like, if you like my prediction, you can get plus money at over 50 at plus 115. And if I'm saying 34-27, that's going to get you to 61. So if you want to ratchet that up to say 53.5, you can get plus over 53.5 is plus 160. So depending on your preference, your flavor of the day when it comes for that final score, you can play around with that alternate total.
Yep. And so that's going to be what's interesting about this game, Jess. It's got some chances to do some funky things, and we haven't seen the Cardinals be this team where you're like, no, they're clearly the better team, right? Like, that's just not something that we're used to. And even now it still feels kind of like, all right, are we really doing this?
Oh, and the Seahawks have beat them not 5 straight games. So Cardinals
Right.
are due. Cardinals are due. So hopefully they crack that nut and get that out of the way, because things get interesting. Things get interesting in the division if Seattle wins this one and the Cardinals have to come back and beat them in the second one, because if Seattle wins that second one, then things get really interesting in the division as well, because then they have the head-to-head over Arizona. We don't want that to happen. So let's take care of that business right now. That way they could weather. Honestly, they could weather losing to Minnesota and then to Seattle again. But I really, just sweep the Seahawks and don't worry about or win all 3 and just keep rolling and then get we wrap up the division and start looking like a team that no one thought was going to be, but it is, and then we're happy, and people are reading our articles and clicking on our sites, and yeah. And listen to the podcast. Let's do this. This is good. I think it's good for everyone involved.
Right. And you kind of said it, Jess. Like, the whole reality of this situation is that while it would be ideal to beat the Vikings, have a chance at the wild card if things fall apart. If you only win 4 games on the back half and you go 4-3, which would be a little disappointing, let's be honest, but still, if you go 4-3, guess what? You win the division, so who cares?
Yeah, especially if you go 4-3 and it's beating the Seahawks twice, Carolina, and New England.
I just meant if you go 4-3 and you beat all your division opponents and you're 6-0 in the division at that
yeah.
point,
Yeah. That
you don't.
I mean, but even like if they go 4-3 and that those two, if they lose the last 2 games of the season, I still think that with because of how we think the second half of the season is going to go for the other teams, if they've beaten Seattle twice, basically knocking Seattle out, and they have 4 division wins, then that way they will outdo San Francisco. And 10 wins and 4 division wins probably does it. But
so that would be.
We still want 11. 11 still a better shot.
So
with that, we will wrap up this edition of the show. That is episode 617. I know Seth's got to get out of here, recording on a Thursday afternoon. He's got stuff to do. I've got stuff to do. We'll have this up. So you've got the show that I posted yesterday from Cole Musgrove on our enemy preview. Seth and I wrap this one up. We will be back again next week, hopefully to talk about a great Cardinals win. But either way, we'll be back very soon. Thanks for listening, as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.
Roll!